Spartans, this is Miss Saffron talking about the physical geography of South Asia. So I'm literally just going to be going through the Nearpod and explaining the concepts in case you just need more help and you weren't able to come to the Zoom meeting or your teacher hasn't Zoomed with you. So going through the physical geography of South Asia notes. South Asia is made up of only 8 countries, so it's not a big region, but it has a lot of physical features. The size of South Asia, it is the second highest population with 1.2 billion people. And you can see with the map right here that it pretty much takes up most of the United States as far as length and size. And their population is growing quite a bit, and their governments are trying to control that, but that's for later lessons. So just looking at the satellite view of South Asia, you can see that there's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of green space, which tells you that there's flat plains, there's some higher levels of elevation with these darker colors, there's a desert-like setting, there's tons of water, lots of coastlines, which gives you an idea of the resources and the trading that goes on in this area. Some major mountain peaks, you have the Himalayas, that's going to be the biggest mountain peak area. You have the Hindu Kush over here in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then Karakoram Mountains, which is kind of hooking onto the Himalaya Mountains as part of that mountain range. You do have what is called the Khyber Pass, which is literally a passage. You can kind of see where these two mountain ranges kind of split right here in the middle. That is the Khyber Pass. And then, of course, the famous Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world, is in this region. So going through the notes, the northern mountains, they're considered barriers between Indian subcontinent and Asia, which is why on the north side of the Himalaya Mountains, on the Chinese side, they have a different kind of culture, different look. And on the southern side, on the Indian side, they have a different culture and look to them as well. And like I said, you have the Himalaya Mountains, the Hindu Kush Mountains, and the Karakoram Mountains are all on the northern side of this region. The Himalayas specifically are a giant barrier between the Indian subcontinent and China. And just kind of breaking down, Him means snow, Alaya means home. So it's snow home is the official translation for that. And then you have Mount Everest, which stands at 29,035 feet high, and it is the highest mountain in the world. The Himalayas were created through plate tectonics. And like you can see in this picture right here, the Indian subcontinent was kind of floating by itself in the Indian Ocean. And over time, it crashes into the Asian continent through collision plates or convergent boundaries. So remember, convergent boundaries make mountains. So this is giving you kind of a 360 view. You can see it's really dry and rocky. There's not a whole lot of stuff that is growing in this area, lots of snow caps, lots of peaks. And they're also young mountains because they are really pointy, which tells you that they're still growing. And yes, every year the Himalaya mountains grow by centimeters. So that's not a lot, but over time that is a lot. Hindu Kush is the mountain range between Pakistan and Afghanistan that again creates a barrier, also creates excellent hiding places, and for people that are nomadic, they can kind of protect themselves in the mountains. The Khyber Pass is a passage through the Hindu Kush mountain range. It's used to invade or pass through to enter India. It's also a trade route, and it's also how culture was spread. In the central part of India, you have the Vindhya Mountains. They separate the Deccan Plateau, so the Vindhya Mountains are here, in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. So it separates the highlands in India and then the Ganges River. It forms a cultural barrier between northern and southern India, and it lies across the central portion of the Indian subcontinent. On the coastline of India, you have what is called the hills or Ghats. So you have a Western Ghats, which is shockingly on the western side, and you have Eastern Ghats, which are on the eastern side of India. So this is just a line of mountain ranges or mountains that just align the coast, and they do cause what is called the orographic effect. So that's where one side of the mountain is really wet, the wet windward side, and then the leeward side is your dry side of the mountain. So here's that rain shadow, or what we call the orographic effect again. So where the cloud comes up to the mountain and squeezed out all of the precipitation. So one side of the mountain is really wet. That's the windward side, the way the wind is blowing. And then the cloud moves on the other side of the mountain. There's nothing left for it to squeeze out. So that is where you get the leeward side, or what we call the rain shadow. The Deccan Plateau is literally at the bottom part of India, or the Indian subcontinent. So again, a plateau is like a tabletop. So it's not a high peak, but it's also higher elevation. And typically it's pretty dry there. It's located between Eastern and Western Ghats. It's semi-arid climate, dry due to the rain shadow effect. And just kind of giving you some stats, it's 31,800 square miles in size. In elevation, it can go anywhere from 2,000 to 8,000 feet high. So it is an area of high elevation. You have the Thar Desert, which is going to be here kind of in the northwestern corner of India. Okay, this is also called the Great Indian Desert, and it goes from 200 feet to 1,500 feet of elevation, so not as high as some of the other mountains. And in the middle of July, it can get up to 127 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty high. Then you have lots of rivers. So we have the Indus River that goes through Pakistan, the Ganges River, which goes through the top part of India, and then the Brahmaputra River that goes up here in Nepal, Bhutan, and then finally into Bangladesh. So the river systems, they're all going to begin in the Himalaya Mountains. So the Indus, the Ganges, and then the Brahmaputra River all start in high elevation in the Himalaya Mountains. And it creates what is called an alluvial plain. So that is this picture over here on the left. It creates all that really green, fertile soil because the rivers are bringing that dirt as it flows down to the ocean. So very similar to what we have when the Brazos River empties into the Gulf of Mexico, or the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico. Same thing that these rivers create here. So the Indus River is a cultural hearth, or the beginning of where some of the ancient cultures in Pakistan and India begin. There is fighting today who controls the headwaters of the river, or where it starts, which is in what is called the Kashmir region in the Himalayas. It starts in India, but mostly flows through Pakistan, and that's where the question is who really controls that river? The Brahmaputra River is the river on the east side of this region that empties into Bangladesh, and it's very famous for flooding. And some of their floods are really, really bad, especially during the monsoon season. And then you have the Ganges River, which is the sacred river to Hindus. They believe that it cleanses your soul and cleanses you away from sins. And so people do a lot of religious rituals in this river. Because a lot of activities are in this river, it is also very polluted. But people call it the Mother Ganges because, again, of what their belief system is. And many people live along the Ganges River. The population is very heavy. It's highly dense because people want to be near a sacred site. So here's just some pictures of the Ganges River. You can see there's a lot of people that live along it. People doing their daily activity, maybe meditation, maybe cleansing themselves for the day, or maybe for a special ritual. So here's a 360 view just along the Ganges River. So you can see very heavily populated, really literally built to ride on. Okay, people with their boats, people in the water, lots of traffic. The Geogenic Plains is where the Ganges River flows through. So it's between the Ganges River and the Indus Rivers, south of the Himalayas. Very fertile area, lots of farming that happens, and also very, very populated. 3/5 of the population of India live in this plains area. Then we have some islands. So you have the Teardrop Island, known as Sri Lanka, and then these teeny tiny little islands called the Maldives. So Sri Lanka has very tropical climate. There are mountains in the center, and there are some small rivers that flow into your oceans, and they have a lot of coastal plains. A lot of their population lives right along the coast. The Maldives is what we call an archipelago, which is multiple islands formed together. There's 1,200 islands, but only 200 of those islands actually have people on them. And the Maldives is actually really famous for having great spots for vacation, like these resorts and whatnot. But it is also very much so at risk of being flooded. So it's also created by these submerged volcanoes, like kind of how you see here. They're what we call atolls, where over time the volcano erodes and then just leaves kind of this coral reef or this ring-like beach that is above the water. So this area is really famous for their monsoon seasons, or what we call seasonal winds. That is where the climate comes into effect. So you have the summer monsoons, which is where the winds come from the ocean, and the winds are picking up water and dumping it onto this region. And so there's a lot of high flooding. Farms are flooded, towns are flooded. They're very unpredictable too. Okay. And then you have what is called winter monsoons, where the winds are coming from the coldness of the Himalayas and bringing just cold, dry weather. And so this is where we have drought, kind of cooler climate rolling into South Asia. So some of the climate regions, so this is very close to the equator. This line right here is 10 degrees north, so it's in the tropics. Most of South Asia is in the tropical range, but if you are in the mountains, you are in what is called highlands, so you're going to have a colder climate. And that is your physical geography notes of South Asia. If you have any questions, please feel free to email your instructor. Thanks for listening. Bye.